Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Welcome to another episode of Ask Rob and Rob, where this week we're answering a question that follows on nicely from last Thursday's episode of the Property Podcast. So we'll listen to that question in just a sec. But first, if you want to respond to the podcast or you've got any other kind of question you want to ask, dead easy to send it our way.
The number to call if you want to phone in and leave your question is 013 808 00035. That's 013 808 00035. Or go to thepropertyhub.net/ask. That's thepropertyhub.net/ask and leave your question that way. It's obviously very easy because straight after last week's podcast, Lauren's been in touch and asked this question.
Hi Rob and Rob, it's Lauren here. Love the podcast. It's really helped me begin my property journey. Really enjoyed the latest episode about property doubling every 10 years, but I noticed you didn't mention anything about interest rates, and surely that has an impact on prices. What do you think? Is that worth considering? Anyway, keep up the good work. Cheers.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a really great question. I'm glad you picked up on it because there are some interesting points around interest rates that we didn't bring up in that episode. And of course, you're absolutely right. Macroeconomic things like that really do have an impact on what's going on in property. So I think there are two main things that I'd say about interest rates in the context of what we talked about in the episode the other day. The first is it's worth acknowledging that if you did buy in the wrong place 10 years ago, like Rob B talked about doing, and as lots of other people did as well, the amazingly low interest rates we've had really have cushioned the blow. So you might have had some misfortune by buying in the wrong place at the wrong time, but potentially have had some really good fortune by getting into a tracker mortgage at the time and seeing your monthly payments absolutely plummet down to practically nothing. As long as you had enough equity to remortgage in the intervening period, you could get some really, really low rates. So that means even though you've had this property that's dipped in value and it's taken 10 years to get back to where it started, at the very least you should have been making a healthy rental return because rents have done pretty well and your interest payment will have been really low. Important to acknowledge because it could so easily have been different. If interest rates had gone up or even stayed where they were and you had a property that had fallen in value, things could have been a lot more precarious. And that's why it's so important to understand the cycle and to understand the different timings of different regions, because you don't want to be in that situation if you can possibly avoid it. This time, the worst that's happened is the opportunity cost. You've had money tied up in an asset that hasn't grown, where if you'd bought in a different place, it could have grown, but it could easily have been worse. A second thing worth touching on as well is the role that interest rates have in driving the cycle. Interest rates are so low at the moment that everything is expensive. So it's been called the everything bubble. The stock markets are expensive. Global property is expensive. It's so cheap to borrow. There's so much debt that's been created that it's driven the price of everything up. Now that's already happened to property in London because we talked about how fast that's recovered over the last few years. That hasn't really happened with property regionally, but we're starting to see the signs now. That money's got to go somewhere. London is already looking like it just doesn't make sense. So we're starting to see Manchester grow faster because that's the next logical place for that money to go. And we've talked in the past about the amount of overseas money that's going into the north. So at the end of the episode, we said that the best in terms of growth is yet to come. We are going to have at some point that explosive period of growth in the cycle, and low interest rates are probably going to be a significant driver in that.
They are, but what makes this really interesting, and this is where I completely geek out on all this type of stuff, is interest rates have their own cycles as well. And interest rates will start to go up because they have to. We need them to. Because without them, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And that's because when we have our next crash in the mid-2020s, say 2025, we will need to be able to lower interest rates to be able to cope with that economic crash. And it's a resource I've recommended multiple times, but I highly recommend Ray Dalio's How the Economic Machine Works, where he goes into more detail on exactly the impact that interest rates and other things play on our market cycles. So just Google How the Economic Machine Works and watch that video. It's time well spent. And time well spent, Rob will be joining us next Thursday for the Property Podcast. And of course, we'll be back next Tuesday with another Ask Rob and Rob. So until then, take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.